welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and hoping that you've all been able to suitably refresh yourselves, ready for the second half. And we're still getting closer to the Eurovision event later in the day, but this is a brilliant preamble. And as we just discussed in the break there with Sarah Longlands, the idea that we can present to people that there are alternatives, I think might be one of the most powerful messages that we can get across to ourselves today. At this point, we were saying, could we have some questions from women? The wonderful thing is, for this afternoon or this second half session, we've got a brilliant panel and a brilliant chair, all women, and we will let them take it away, starting with our chair, Jackie Jones, former MEP for Wales, Professor of Law, who we've already worked out doesn't like marking too many essays, and the current chair of the Wales Council of the Co-operative Party, and a brilliant ally of us at Co-ops and Mutuals Wales. So without further ado, I hand over to Jackie Jones. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Chris. Prynawn da, everyone. Thank you very much for coming online today. And hasn't it been a fascinating morning? Absolutely brilliant. And I've learned a lot. Now I'm going to learn even more with these brilliant women who are coming up and going to be talking to us. Why? Because what we're trying to do today is disrupt the status quo, the economic status quo, which Richard so brilliantly highlighted. And we can do it because we are seeing today what some of those examples might be and what it might look like. But the first thing that I want to say is that with good Labour Party tradition, organise, 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 and then act. So that's really what today is about. The big ideas, the little steps towards the big ideas and fashioning a brand new future for all of us, where all of us are levelled up, for that terrible phrase, but apt for today. So the first speaker that we've got is our brilliant Liz McIvor, and she is the trust manager and lead at the Co-operative Heritage Trust and social historian, and she's based in the northwest of England. That's okay, that's all right. Among many other things, she's well known for impressive books, which I'm supposed to tell that David asked me to say, about canals, the making of a nation. Canals were such an important part of the economic structure of England in particular, weren't they, a couple of centuries ago. That book was produced to accompany the BBC series and is well worth a read, quote unquote. Liz has been a staunch friend in work to establish a Robert Owen Day in recent years, and I thank you very much for that. So please, over to you, Liz, and whoever you've got behind you as well.
Thank you very much, Jackie. That's very kind. Bore da, pen blaw thapus Robert Owen. I don't speak much Welsh other than that, I'm afraid. But I have to put something in there. I spent a lot of years in Wales in my early career and was lucky enough to study there. And now I'm the proud patron of the Swansea Canal Society, which I'll be doing some work this summer to celebrate their 225th anniversary. So that's appropriate. We have a few slides just to illustrate what I'm going to be talking about. So, Jonathan, I think you're going to bring those up for me. But I'm going to start by explaining who we are. I'm the trust manager at Co-operative Heritage Trust, and that brings together the archives and the museum that I'm speaking to you from today, Rochdale Pioneers Museum. And it was created, our charity, independently to safeguard the heritage of the UK movement, which is heavily influenced, of course, by Owenite thought and by responses to seismic change in industry, in society, and in the economy in the 19th century. And we hold objects and records associated with lots of cooperators, but importantly for today, Robert Owen. And for this event, we were really interested not so much in talking about Owen's life or his influences on cooperators throughout the last 200 years, but taking young people's perspective on some of these ideas around the focus of community wealth building, which is what today is about. We didn't want it to be our opinion. We wanted to inform young people and to get a snapshot of some of their ideas. Now, there aren't young people here with me today because of various safeguarding rules around people under the age of 18 appearing on these platforms, not least because it's a beautiful Saturday and there's not a chance we could get under 18s out to Rochdale for this, but they have contributed to some of what I'll be talking about. So if we can have the next slide, please. We wanted to explore these ideas. We know that people under 30 are much less likely to have encountered Owen in terms of the curriculum when they were learning about economics and social history at school. And they're not going to be as familiar with cooperatives either because of the ways that cooperative membership has changed. And it means that unless there's a geographical link for young people, unless, for example, you're from Newtown or from, the area around Wales where Robert Owen was from, or you're from perhaps New Lanark in Scotland, there wouldn't necessarily be a reason to study Robert Owen at school at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4. So developments in the Welsh curriculum are really interesting, and it's a really interesting opportunity for us to see how that historical perspective might change young people's ideas about other things in their lives. If we can go to the next slide. So on a very basic level, we wanted to see if a cohort of young people, what they thought about some of these ideas and how it might affect the development of modern communities. So we gave them a basic version of what Robert Owen wanted, some of the things he was interested in no particular order. And we asked them to rate them according to what they thought was most important to them in their lives and their communities, rather than from a historical perspective. And we did get obviously permission to record their voices, but not to record them on screen. So this cohort were all under 18, and most of them were aged between 12 and 15. So this is really interesting, considering some of the curriculum experiments and developments that might be affecting some of them. They're not all from Manchester, some of them were from Wales, some of them were also from Scotland. And we were able to work with the Co-operative College and some of their youth programmes to get this net of young people to respond to our introduction to Robert Owen. So what we asked them to look at was education being important for children and adults, so long-term education. Good environments where people can work and live and treat each other better. People being encouraged to use their skills and talents to be the best that they can be. Having a good work-life balance, being fairly paid for specialised skills, equality at the heart of community, and money and assets being kept within the community, the concept of community wealth building, really. So if we can go to the next slide, we asked them to rate those points. And I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but what really stands out, what they all chose as number one, was equality, and specifically in terms of race and background and gender. So the poll that we gave them didn't allow for a lot of nuance, but what it did do is it showed their responses to be fairly similar in terms of most of the concepts, but equality stands out as number one. And interestingly, in the sort of dark purple, the very small band that you can see on that graph, that's work-life balance. So a lot of them didn't see a good work-life balance as being naturally equal to all those other aspects of Owenite ideas. And we wanted to know why. And it was because they didn't understand, they sort of struggled with the concept that if people have jobs and they're being paid fairly for the work that they're doing, they thought that must, by nature, mean they work harder and for longer. And that was really interesting, a really interesting perspective, that they didn't understand the concept of a better work-life balance might mean you do good work, you do smart work, but perhaps you don't have to work as long hours, you don't have to commute as much, and potentially you don't have to move away from your community. So that idea was really, really interesting. And it's something that's been alluded to by some of the other speakers today, that concept of making a change that changes not just your access to education and work, but the way that you perceive your environment and your community. and that it can be potentially different. We have a lot of work, I think, to do with young people in unpicking some of the last 40, 50 years of that capitalist approach, that it's all about making money and it's all about moving out and moving on. So these simple results, they don't reflect nuance, obviously, but that this kind of indication of the sense of presenteeism, long hours, long sort of difficult working culture, despite the growth of more dynamic models, it means really that we wanted to look at Owen's influence and sort of see whether or not young people could make the connection between some of these ideas and some of the potential new models for society and economy. If we go on to the next slide, please. We asked a couple of our new archive volunteers the same questions. So we compared that to the younger cohort. And these volunteers are students, they're kind of in their late teens, early 20s. We asked a number of them to respond in the same way to what the younger cohort had. And we asked them more nuanced questions about what they'd looked at. And I'm going to use an example of one of our volunteers, Jasmine, who's a student and had already heard of Owen. And she said that she'd heard about him doing politics at A level. But what was interesting was that he wasn't referred to in any way in terms of the British context, the cooperative movement. It was really more about the model of New Harmony in America that didn't work and the reasons why it didn't work. So that was what the angle was. And it wasn't explored at any deeper level, either for politics or for the economy and economics. And she said that from her own personal experience, what was really interesting was she found out a little bit more about Owen by volunteering, by getting to grips with some of his materials and some of the ideas that we talk about. And she said that when she left Manchester, where she's originally from, to go and study in Brighton, she realised gradually as she got involved with cooperatives and social enterprises as a student, that actually she'd, in her words, wasted quite a lot of her time when she could have done some of that in her own community. And by the time she moved back to her community, she saw a lot of gentrification, a lot of change, and felt that she'd missed out on being able to use some of her skills and talents directly in her community to benefit other people. And it was something that she felt might have been better for her in the long run had she not left home. But she talked about the theme of moving up means moving out, that the messages for young people are always do better, move, leave, take your skills away, that's the model that is constantly being delivered to young people in schools, in colleges and afterwards. And the message is not stay and make the best and make the difference in your community. And that's really interesting.
Liz, you've got about a minute left.
That's okay, I'm coming to the end now. If we go to the next slide, this is Inc, another archive volunteer. I'm going to let them speak for themselves.
Just in terms of like actually getting community members together and being able to take that burden off people, it is still something that is happening, even if not to the same degree, but it is still something that is really valuable. And it's quite, I don't know, encouraging to be able to read at how widespread things like this were in the past, because, I don't know, like it makes me feel like maybe that's something that we could have again in the future, because it's just obvious that what's happening right now isn't working for people.
Thanks very much. If we go on to the next slide, that main takeaway was about discovering those new models by being involved with Owen's collections and making the connection between that historical narrative and the cooperative enterprises that Inc and her other students are involved in at the moment. There was an option in the poll for the younger cohort, the under 18s, to send a message to Robert Owen as a modern influencer. And these are some of the quotes that I picked out of that. I can't share them all. But we want to thank that cohort of young people for their contribution to this and for the Cooperative College's time in helping us to communicate with them and talk to them. And it's been a really interesting start to look at how we might use our materials with young people, especially in view of some of the changes that are proposed for the Welsh curriculum coming up. So thanks again. And if you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Liz. That's absolutely great. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. I really like the part about equality in particular. And it would be interesting because obviously one of the things as a professor I was specializing is equality, what they think equality means as well. But that's just my personal view. But we do have one question from Chris, and that is, how far can we go with presenting Robert Owen in the curriculum, not just in history, but also in terms of philosophy, sociology, and politics? And I think you're almost answering some of that in those quotes, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. That way that Owen, the people who we talked to who had heard of him in very narrow contexts rather than multiple contexts. And actually, if you're going to talk about Owenite thought, it affects so many aspects of academic work, of, you know, kind of political thought and change making. So the fact that he's only been viewed in these very narrow contexts is interesting. That in one example, he's been used as an example of what not to do. And that tells you something about the politicization of what we're teaching young people in schools, that we're teaching them that there's only one model that we should follow. And it's a model that, for those of you perhaps who couldn't hear Ink's very quiet voice, what Ink was trying to say is, this is a model that doesn't work for young people. This is proven to not work. That the thing that is really coming out of the questionnaires that we've asked and the workshops that young people have had is that they feel despondent about the future. They don't feel that they genuinely have the opportunities that they're told they do, because that's not what they see in their day-to-day lives in their own communities a lot of the time. And that's where that narrative of move out to move on comes from.
Yeah, there's no place to go now. I see that at university as well. I am lecturing as well, and 20-year-olds. It's the whole generation. So I've got another question. Thank you, Liz. From Ian. What do young people understand by equitable society?
That is such an interesting question, because if somebody asked me that question, my answer would be really different to somebody who's perhaps 14 or 15. Now, you have to take account of the fact that these are people who don't have jobs and don't live outside of a fairly small world of family, school, you know, local community. But what the sort of takeaway seemed to be, what they all seem to agree with, is that they know they're not coming from a place of equality in the first place. That their experiences in their lives, however narrow that might be compared to an adult life, a lived experience, is that depending on your gender, depending on your racial or religious background, you will experience things differently, even if you go to the same school, you live in the same village, the same town. And that is something that they're very, very aware, hyper aware of, I would say. And they put all of the need for change around that narrative. So actually, of course, all of those points that we asked them to look at, they're all fairly equitable in that we need all of that to have a successful community. But they see that being the biggest cliff face that young people experience. In their lived experience, that's the biggest issue.
Yeah. So a lot of it is based around identity.
Yeah.
Location.
That might be gender identity,
time.
it might be socioeconomic identity, but those are the things that are affecting their lives on a day-to-day basis. They're the things that are influencing the communications they have, the friends that they have, and what they see as their future.
Yeah. So it's about exploring self in their surroundings in a contextual way, and the context is not very favourable.
Yes, although they do seem to particularly value this idea of being your best self. It's an influencer TikTok style language, but what it really means is being able to develop the natural talents and skills that you have in a way that benefits not just you, but everybody else. And that's, I think, the link that they need. They need a bridge between the life they live now and what they can do with those skills and talents realistically, and how they can be helped to do that.
Fab. Yeah, they're much more clued in than we give them credit for, I think, as well. Because it's a huge amount of information coming towards them. I've got one final question for you, if that's okay. Would you make the case for an annual Robert Owen Day? Of course, asked by Chris.
Well, of course I would. I'm here today. I've been here for the last few. But it's not just about Robert Owen Day. I think that the very fact that he or Owenite thought or cooperative development is not anywhere in the UK curriculum, the wider curriculum, that is a problem to me. The fact that we don't explore and discover the seismic changes of agricultural revolutions, industrial revolutions, we don't study those lower key stages. And that is a problem, I think. I think it means that young people are less prepared to have these debates and to be politically active in the world as adults. They are underprepared because they haven't been given the context of these historical movements. And I'm not saying that it needs to be entirely about that, but I think we need it to be a wider focus than what young people are currently getting. So I think Robert Owen is very important for Welsh history and Welsh curriculum, but I think he's equally important for the global curriculum.
Definitely. And did you find any understanding that demonstrated cooperation being about economic democracy finally? And then
it's a harder point to get across, yeah. I think. But they're right in that when you talk to young people, if you get the small society right first, you can get the big society right later. And ultimately, that's the experience of cooperative membership in the UK over the last 200 years. Start small, start local, start community. And then those ideas, once people see them working and benefiting people, they grow. So that's ultimately how you have to start it. You have to start it with something people can understand and see making a benefit where they live.
Yeah. And changing the curriculum as we are in Wales is part of that process as well, because education hasn't changed much in the last 300 years or so. You sit at a desk, and whether it's an electronic blackboard, but it's still blackboard, it's not good enough. It's just not good enough anymore as from an educator. But what you're doing is absolutely fantastic, because feeling and touching and seeing and smelling are all important features, especially if we're on our phones all the time. So that's a really good connection with the physical that people need to reinvigorate. Liz, you're doing fantastic work. I want to thank you for everything that you do. This is a great presentation. I hope there's more things like this happening as well. Maybe we can do something like this in Wales too. Maybe you can help us. So,
well, I'd be very happy to. And I think Mark Drakeford's 3 points, courage, innovation and persistence, they're what we need to take this forward. We have to keep at it. We can't give up at the first hurdle. So yes, be more than happy to help.
Thank you very much.